So standard form is the third form that you're going to learn about writing equations of lines in. It's one of those forms that it's not like an amazing form to see, like slope or anything of that nature. You have to do some work to find stuff. We use slope intercept or standard form to find the x and y intercepts when we were graphing. The big thing with learning standard form is it's really good for word problems. A lot of word problems are directly written in standard form, and that's kind of why we need to teach it, because it comes more with context than other forms, whereas point slope and slope intercept are better for the graphing aspect. So each of them kind of have their own little place that they're good for. So let's just talk about the three forms just one more time, and I know that I keep making you write this, but the more you know it, the better chances you'll have on writing the correct equation. So the very first form, which you have been learning now for over a year between middle school and now, is slope-intercept form, and that's y equals mx plus b. So Sarah, tell me the two things you need to write an equation in slope-intercept form.
Slope and y-intercept.
Good. Remember, a y-intercept can be, it's 0, a number, so that's 0, b there. And then we've been talking about point slope form the last 2 days. You need to know all of these equations by heart, including the slope formula for your quiz on Friday. So make sure you're studying them if you don't remember these. I'm hoping that by practicing them so much, you have a memorization now of them. And me making you write the blank formula down so many times too. So that's point slope. Kaylin, what do you need for a point slope formula?
A slope.
And?
Any point on the line.
Any point on the line. Good. Point slope is one of those forms that you are going to use probably the most frequently. So this form here, I would put a note underneath it that says you will typically start in this form. Now, that's not true of word problems. When it comes to word problems or context problems, you'll either use slope-intercept form or standard form. But when we're talking about just general rote skilled problems, you'll typically start in point slope. And then today you're going to learn about standard form. The thing about standard form is you can't see a slope, you can't see the y-intercept, you can't see a point. So, again, standard form is better for context reasons than anything, but this form, to write an equation in it, is not going to be because you're given a slope or something like that. So with standard form, you'll typically change this. So let's write typically you will rearrange point slope or standard or point slope or slope intercept to get into standard form. Okay, so this form, remember we did talk about standard form being able to find the x and y intercepts. You can let y equal 0 to find the x-intercept, and you can let x equal 0 to find the y-intercept. So that's just some little recaps here, so go ahead and get that written down, and then we have some rules of standard form. Okay, so standard form is ax plus by equals c, where a, b, and c are real numbers. Really what this should say is a, b, and c are integer numbers. So change that to integer numbers, which means the numbers on a number line, the counting numbers. You don't usually count with fractions and decimals, so it's the numbers you're counting with. And a and b are both not 0. One can be 0, but not the other. So the big thing here is a, b, and c must be integers. So this means no fractions or decimals. A must not be negative, so that's what that's saying there. But, just so you know, B and C can be negative. And then finally, A, B, and C cannot have a common factor, so this means that you cannot divide each by the same number. And if you have to, we have to simplify that. So you know how like when we simplify fractions, like if it's 4 over 8, we say 4 goes into both when we divide top and bottom by 4. If the same number goes into all three, A, B, and C, then we have to divide that out. All right, what questions do you guys have for me before we get into examples? Whenever you're ready, flip. I can wait until you guys are there.
I accidentally did mine on that slide too, so I just...
Oh, don't worry about it. I don't really care where you write as long as you have it.
Okay.
Okay, so let's get started here. Remember, we're writing each equation in standard form, which means we need it as ax plus by equals c. So that means you want to get your variables on the same side of the equation. So Madison, in example 1, what do we need to do to get this into standard form? So we want to get the x and the y on the same side. So how are we going to move negative 2x? Good. So then we have to go through our checklist of all the things on the previous slide. So there's a few things we have to check off. Number 1. Are there fractions or decimals? Olivia, do we have fractions or decimals? No, so we're good there. Number 2. Is A, which is the number in front of x, negative? Is A negative, Spencer? It's the number in front of x. No, it's a positive 2, so we're good there. And then finally, are there common factors? So common factors means the same number goes into everything. So we have a 2, a 1 in front of y, and a 4. Does the same number go into 2, 1, and 4? 1 is the biggest number that can go into them. If we divide stuff by 1, what's going to happen? Nothing's going to happen, right? So if 1 is the biggest number that goes into all three, then you don't have any common factors. So we're good there, and you're in standard form. So go ahead and get that stuff written down and see if you have any questions for me. So that's the checklist I want you guys to go through once you got all your variables on the same side. Okay, example 2. Alex, get that into standard form.
Subtract 3x.
Divide by what?
-3.
Okay, let's stop there. If we divide by -3, if we divide this by -3, that's 1. If we divide that by -3, that's -1/3. So we don't want a fraction in our problem, do we? So let's go through our checklist now. So number 1 is, are there fractions or decimals? Fractions or decimals? No. How about our a value? Is it negative? So Jenny, how am I going to get rid of that?
Divide by
So divide everything by -1. Bless you. And then 3 asks us, is there a common factor? So is there anything other than 1 that can divide into 3, -1, and 12? Sorry. 3 can go into 3 and 12, but can it go into 1? No. So do we have a common factor? No. So we are done with that. All right, look at those so far and see what questions you guys have for me before we move on to the next examples. So that's kind of the checklist I want you guys to go through. No, you do not have to write down 1, 2, and 3. That can be something you do in your head. I'm just writing it down in the notes. So when you go back and look at your notes, you can say, oh, these are the questions I need to ask myself to make sure it's really in standard form. All right, so we're going to look at example 3 next. All right, Spencer, what do I need to do first to get example 3 into standard form? So distribute the -2. So if I distribute -2, Spencer, what do I get?
4 minus 7 equals -2x plus 8.
Good. Iris, what should I do now? So we want to get it into standard form. So we need to get the number, the constant on one side, and the variables on the other. Jacqueline. Okay, Vivian, let's go through our checklist. Number 1, is there any fractions or decimals? Okay, is our a value negative, Vivian?
No.
No, it's a +2. Are there any common factors that go into 2, 1, and 18?
No.
No. So we are done. Okay, Kaylin, start me off with example 4. What would you do first?
I would distribute the 1/4.
Good, and if you need to use your calculators with these fractions, because there's going to be a fraction in this, take it out now. So 1 times anything is itself, so that's just going to be -1/4 there. But If you need your calculator for the next step, that is okay. Alexis, now what? So you need a common denominator when you add or subtract, which is going to be 4. 12 divided by 4 is 3. So that's negative 13. We keep the denominator the same over 4, which is the same thing as 3 and 1/4. So if you put minus 3 and 1/4 there, or minus 3.25, you can use a decimal there if you want to. It's easier to work with fractions, though, when it comes to standard form than decimals. So I would really avoid changing things to decimals. I would really keep them as fractions. All right. Kelly, what now?
Can we get rid of the fractions now, or should we?
You could, but I'm going to wait until the end just so that everybody can see the steps. If you wanted to do it now, that would be completely fine, though.
Okay, so you'd subtract 1/4.
Mm-hmm. Technically, you could, though. So if you wanted to do that, would be completely fine. But for notes purposes, let's do it all at once. Okay, checklist time. Do we have fractions or decimals, Carly?
Yes.
How can I get rid of my fraction then? What's the denominator? So the least common denominator of 4 and 4 is 4, so we're going to multiply everything by 4. You could do negative 4 here. I'm not going to do it that way at this point so we can go through the checklist, but yes, you could do negative 4. That is completely fine. So that's negative x plus 4y equals negative 13. These 4's will cancel there. That's why that happened. Iris, do we have a negative a value? How can I get rid of the negative a value? What'd you say? Multiplying by 1 will keep everything the same. We want to what? That will keep everything the same. Multiply by, what changes the signs? There you go. So multiply by negative 1. Remember, if you multiply or divide by 1, it just keeps everything the same. So you said multiply, the same thing as dividing. So that's x minus 4y equals 13. And then finally, Jill, are there any common factors in 1, 4, and 13? No. All right. What questions do you guys have so far with what we are doing? Because this can be confusing because there's just a lot of things to remember. So take your notes out while you're doing your notes and maybe just keep that checklist in front of you so you know exactly what you're thinking about. Because this is new. So you need to learn things, and that means that you want to keep your notes so you're doing things right so you don't teach yourself the wrong thing here. All right. The line that contains the points 3, -1 and 2, -3, we need to write that into standard form. How are we going to get that into standard form? What are we going to have to do?
Start with point slope form.
Sometimes you start with point slope form. Most of the time you're going to have to start with point slope form, guys. All right? There's no good way of writing an equation in standard form without starting in point slope or slope intercept form first. So you're going to have to start with one of those ones. We can't start with slope intercept because we don't have a y-intercept because neither x value is 0. So that's why we're not starting there. So Sarah, what do I have to do first to get into point slope form? Tell me how do I do that then?
I set it up in a table and then.
Okay, we can do it that way. That's fine. So you said x and y. You have 3, -1. and 2, negative 3. So this changes by what? And this changes by what? So negative 2 over 1. Negative 2 over negative 1 is 2. Good. All right. Now I have to get it into point slope form, Hannah. How does that look? Which point do you want to use? I don't really care which one.
3 negative 1.
Okay. So go ahead and write it in point slope form.
Y minus, wait, y plus 1.
Good. Well, minus negative 1 becomes plus 1 equals
2 times x minus 3.
But our final answer needs to be in standard form. So if my final answer needs to be in standard form, Madison, what do I need to do first here?
Distribute 2
And what do you get? Y plus 1 equals?
2x minus 6.
Good. And then what, Madison? Trying to get it to standard form.
You subtract the 1 from y.
Then what, Madison? To get it into standard form?
You subtract 2x from y.
Okay, guys, so now we go through our checklist. Alb, you're going to help me with the checklist, okay? So 1 says, are there fractions or decimals? So are there any fractions or decimals? No, so we're good there. Is your A value negative, Alb? Yeah, so how can we get rid of that? And then finally, are there any common factors, Alb, that go into 2, 1, and 7? All right. So sometimes when we're given points and stuff, or given like a graph or anything of that nature, we're going to have to start in point slope form or standard form to get to, or point slope form or slope intercept form to get to standard form. Who thinks they can answer what example 6 is asking? Explain why 5x plus 10y equals 25 is not in standard form. Vivian, why is that not in standard form?
Because they all have a common factor.
All have a common factor of what?
5.
So it doesn't, the A value is not negative, so that's fine. There's no fractions or decimals, but they all have a common factor of, oh my goodness. Factor of 5. So, Kelly, what will I have to do then to get it into standard form?
Just divide everything by 5.
So divide by 5. So I get x plus 2y equals 5. So if you're going to divide and it creates a fraction, you know that's not a common factor. But if it doesn't create a fraction, then you are fine. There's no negative a value and there's no fractions. So that is now in standard form. All right, before we move on to the next one, what questions do you guys have for me? All right, Hannah, what does f of 4 equals 1 and f of 10 equals 3 mean?
4 is your x and 10 is your y.
Good, so you have ordered pairs here. Can we just start in standard form? Do we know a way just to start in standard form? No. Could we write this in slope-intercept form, Jacqueline? Why not? We could find the slope though. What don't we know to put it in slope-intercept form? Y-intercept, your x value isn't 0, so you have to start in point-slope form. So we find the slope first, so Alexis, help me find the slope. How do you want to find the slope? What'd you say? So it's change in y over change in x, and how will you do that? Tell me exactly what to plug into that.
3 minus 1.
Over.
10 minus 12.
Perfect. So what goes into 2 and 6? So that's 1/3. So you can divide top by 2 and bottom by 2. So our slope is 1/3. So we said we have to start in point slope. Alex, write the equation in point slope using one of the points. Which one do you want to use? 4-1 or 10-3?
4-1.
Okay, write it in point slope for me.
Y minus 1 equals 1/3 times x.
Again, keep things as fractions. It's much easier to clear a fraction than it is a decimal, because you can see the denominator. So Madison, what do I have to do here?
Just divide the 1/3.
Good, and you guys need to make sure that if you don't know how to do this, you're using your calculator. So 1/3 times 4 is 1 times 4, 3 times 1, so that's 4/3, or just plug it into your calculator. That's the same thing as 1 and 1/3. Morgan, what would you tell him to do now? So our common denominator would be 3. 3 divided by 3 is 1. That's negative 1/3. So we have y equals 1/3 x minus 1/3. Jenny, now what?
You add or subtract 1/3.
Okay, it's time to go through the checklist, Mackenzie, so go through that with me. Number 1, are there fractions or decimals?
Yeah.
So how am I going to get rid of it?
Multiply everything by 3.
In this case, the denominators are 3, so we'll multiply everything by 3. So that's negative x 3 plus 3y equals negative 1. Okay, Mackenzie, is our a value negative?
Yes.
So what do we have to do?
Divide everything by negative 1.
Divide by negative 1. And finally, Mackenzie, do we have a common factor?
No.
Good. So what questions do you guys have before we go through the last 2 examples? Yeah, Madison.
I forgot if you said it, but when we multiply everything by 3, it's a negative 3.
And like Kelly asked you, could you clear the fraction earlier? Yes. So it's your choice when you want to do that stuff. I'm just doing it kind of streamlined for the notes, so I'm not confusing too many people. Do you have a question or you just start taking it? Okay, so the next example there is a graph. Be very careful because a lot of students will think that if they know the x and y intercept, they can just put it into standard form. That's not how standard form works. Typically, you're going to have to start from slope-intercept or point-slope form to write in standard form unless it's a word problem. So how could we write the equation of this line here? What could we do? would use point slope or slope intercept? Yeah, we could just use the slope here. Isn't the slope here 1, 2, 3, 4, up 4, left 2? So the change in y over change in x equals negative 4 over 2, which is negative 2, right? So if I continue that up 2 over 1, where am I at on the y-intercept? Where's that point? What is that point? 0, 6. So we know our y-intercept, so let's start from slope-intercept here instead of point slope. So what's my equation in slope-intercept form? Go ahead, Alexis. Perfect. Which makes it a little bit easier than point slope form to get it into standard form, Sarah. So what do we have to do? How about for our checklist, Sarah? Do we have fractions? Do we have negative a value? Do we have any common factors? So that one, makes it a little bit easier. So if you can write it in slope-intercept form, I would write it in slope-intercept form. Okay, we have one more problem, and it's a word problem. All right, write an equation in standard form to model the linear situation. So a barrel of oil was filled at a constant rate of 7.5 gallons per minute. The barrel had 10 gallons before filling began. So is this equation going to be written in slope-intercept, point slope, or standard form? Jenny? So y equals mx plus b problem. So Jenny, tell me the equation. Y equals? What, Jenny, is it?
7.5x.
So that's your rate. Good. Right, and you start it with 10 gallons. Jill, what will I do first to get this into standard form? Do we have a fraction or decimal? Let's change that decimal to a fraction. Have a good day, Madison. Change that to a fraction. What is that as a fraction? Sarah? That is 7.5, so change that to an improper fraction now. Well, if it's 7.5, 7 times 2 is 14 plus 1 is negative 15 over 2. So it's easiest to change it to a fraction to figure out how to get rid of it. So let's do this all in one step. What could I multiply everything by to get rid of both the negative and the fraction? Kelly? Negative 2. That's 15 minus 2y equals negative 20. 15x, sorry. And there's no common factor with all of those, so we are good there.